So welcome to another episode of In the Deep with Dave. Today we have got an entrepreneur with us. He's owned and been involved in multiple businesses, director of multiple businesses, and I thought it'd be a great guest to bring to the listeners. So today's guest is a guy called Peter Marples, and I'll just let Peter introduce a little bit about himself.
Hi, thanks Dave, and thanks for the introduction and indeed the welcome. I'm Pete Marples, a lad from Derbyshire who was born and brought up in Derbyshire, left school at 16, did an apprenticeship and had a pretty varied career, involvement in a number of businesses, one in Sunderland, which was very successful, part owner of a football club that went to the Premier League, so I'm sure there's some interesting stories about that. Battled with mental illness during many years of my life, and then now I work with a number of businesses, mentoring owners of businesses and helping their businesses grow and exit.
So going back to the start, you're involved in a business in Sunderland called Asa.
That's right.
And when you first got into business, what was your kind of first inroad into business? How did you get involved in business and in owning businesses, if you like? Yeah,
I was pretty late in life doing that. I was a trainee accountant. I trained in the public sector in a local authority when I left school at 16 and qualified as an accountant at 21. I then had a couple of years in the civil service, which wasn't that exciting, I have to say, and then joined KPMG, the big international firm of accountants. And having joined there in 1990, I was fortunate but worked hard and became a partner in KPMG in 1995 and led their education practice both in the UK and Europe. Yeah. So getting involved in the education market at that time was quite exciting. Polytechnics were becoming universities. Colleges came out of local authority control and became independent businesses. And therefore I got involved in that and led their business both from an audit perspective and a consultancy perspective. And then 2002 came along and I was interviewed for a job by Ernst & Young, and the deputy UK senior partner there, a guy called Mark Molyneux, who I remember very well, said, "You've got the job, Pete, but you should be running your own business."
Right.
And I'd never even occurred to me. I'd been in professional practice for a long period of time, and 6 months later I left KPMG, big change, and went up to Asa up in the northeast as their strategy director, and then shortly after joining there did a management buyout of that business.
Excellent. And did you know when you went up to Asa and you lead the management buyout, did you know that this is the path now I want to be on, this is where I want to go?
I was naive. Didn't really know what a management buyout was. That wasn't the plan, to be honest, when we got there. It wasn't the plan to do an MBO. I wanted to help build that business to a national business. But the owner of that business decided he wanted to leave sort of 6 months in. So I was basically given the option of leading an MBO. So we did, and we did that very quickly, very successfully. Went through quite a lot of trauma over that time. Yeah. And then 2 years later, we were very successful being approached to sell it by PLC. And we sold that business for just over 25 million.
Right.
So it was a very, very big learning curve.
I can imagine.
Didn't understand what cash flow was till I got there. And all of those sorts of things. So you have to learn quickly.
So you almost became an apprentice of owning a business. You started off your life as an apprentice and then probably went back to doing an apprenticeship on running your own business and management buyouts and cash flow and P&Ls and...
Yeah, it's a great analogy, actually. If you think about it, being in somewhere like KPMG, there was a department that collected the cash.
Yes.
As a role as a partner, your role was to look after the clients, potentially win new business, build good relationships with those clients, and ultimately grow the business. But all that back office, day-to-day grind, you'd think, is just something that you just didn't have anything to do with. And actually, part of running a business is doing all of that. Even if you're the MD of the business, you've got to keep an eye on cash flow, because cash flow is reality, and people talk a lot about it, but it's absolutely true. Turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash flow is reality, and you've got to keep those. You can only grow a business if you've got cash flow coming through the door. and certainly was a massive learning curve. Exciting.
Yeah.
Living in the George Washington Hotel for 2 years.
Yeah.
I had some pretty lonely nights up there. But no, learned a huge amount.
Excellent. So in terms of when you went through the management buyout and you were learning these things, for somebody listening who potentially has this opportunity, and I think sometimes people go, I don't know what I'm doing here, so I'm not gonna take that risk, or I've never done a management buyout, or I've never led a business or run a cash flow, so I'm going to give this a miss. What made you think, actually, I can do this, or I'm going to take this risk, or I'm going to have a go at this?
I think, first of all, and a lot of people say this, but it's true, I had a passionate about education.
Yeah.
And I think if you are passionate about your subject, you've got a good chance of making the right decisions and ultimately being successful. So I say to people, for example, the analogy I use, if you want to be a fish and chip shop owner, be a fish and chip shop owner and be very successful at it by making the best fish and chips in Sunderland or Newcastle or Derbyshire or Leicestershire. And you could build a national franchise of fish and chips. Harry Ramsden's, that's what they did many years ago. And you build a brand and all of those sorts of things. So I think, first of all, have a passion. Don't just get out of bed and go, I want to make money, because I think if you do that, you're likely to make the wrong decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the second thing is specifically about things like management buyouts and things. I think when you're going through that process or even thinking of that process, there's lots of acronyms and terminologies, EBITDAs and arbitrage and all of those stupid words, I call them. And I think I always say to people, never be frightened to ask the stupid question, because the stupid question is often the good question.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty, I've got pretty broad shoulders, and I was always, even though I came from a professional services background, I didn't know what EBITDA was, I didn't know what arbitrage was, I didn't know what a multiple was, and all of those sorts of things. But I was actually prepared to say to the corporate finance specialists, look, can you just tell me what that means?
Yeah.
And actually, you get to understand those things more quickly. And therefore, I think have a passion is absolutely critical, and also be prepared to ask those stupid questions. And I think I started very late in life as a businessman. I was probably 36, 37 before I owned my first business. I always also say to people is start as young as you can.
Yeah.
Because actually, when you're young, if it all falls over, whilst it's hard and it's painful, actually you don't have those commitments that somebody in 36, mortgage, kids, all of those sorts of things has. And therefore it becomes much more difficult to make the decision to do that when you're in that age. Whereas if you're younger, you fall over, it hurts, but actually you can get yourself back up again because it's not hurt as much, because there aren't probably as many consequences. So I always say, if you've got a vision young, get on with it and do it. And try it and see what it feels like.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, to be fair. So from there, you led the management buyout. You then took control of the business, if you like. Where did you go from there? You grew the business to...
Yeah, we grew the business over a couple of years. We built the business quite dramatically, quite rapidly over that 2-year period. Won some pretty prestigious contracts. We won a massive contract with Land Rover, Jag, Aston Martin, which was a big apprenticeship program. We formed the first ever apprenticeship program for the Premier League, for the 20 Premier League route.
Brilliant.
So we had Wayne Rooney as one of our apprentices, would you believe?
Really?
Who's now playing for Derby, would you believe?
Yeah, it's a good connection.
So we built that, and then we were approached in May 2005 by a large PLC in the same market as us, to sell that. So we built a really good team, good management team. A lot of those people are still in the Northeast working hard, and doing very well in second roles, and some as chief execs of their own businesses now.
Brilliant.
So that's how we grew the business.
So from there, when you exited the business, what was your plan? What was your plan then? So you've taken a business, led the management buyout, you've grown the business, and then you've eventually sold out. That's the ultimate dream for all entrepreneurs, is it not?
Well, I thought so.
Yeah.
And I, woke up the following morning with a big check in the bank, and to be perfectly honest, went into massive depression, because in a way I'd got everything, but I got nothing. Actually, what I was waking up for every day was actually to the excitement and the stress and the strain
Yeah.
of running my own business. And actually that had gone. So having all the money in the world and all the stuff that comes with it, the cars and the houses and all of those things, it really meant nothing to me. So the original view was I was going to retire and spend more time with the wife. And actually, it didn't quite pan out that way.
Right. Yes. So in terms of, and that's probably key then, probably key advice, and we've probably heard this story before, where they've led the business, they've sold the business, they've achieved their ultimate aim is to exit and have all of this money, and then the feel of you're not fulfilled. And I think more and more people now are saying enjoy the journey. Have a goal that never ends. And I think that's probably key in this story here is if the goal's to sell out and enjoy the money and drive nice cars and buy big houses, but actually it's not enjoyable, then you have a goal that never ends where you can continue. And I think once you've been a business owner, an entrepreneur, been there, you like the thrill of going to work and fighting the fires and dealing with the people and moulding the people and developing the people that work underneath you. And I think once you've done that, it's very difficult to just wake up one morning and say, I'm just going to do nothing.
You're absolutely right, Dave. I mean, what are entrepreneurs? They're innovative people generally. Yeah. They're positive people by their nature. That's why there aren't many accountants as entrepreneurs. They are individuals that are problem solvers. They love a problem because actually a problem to them is something that you just want to solve and solve positively. And they are people that strive for excellence, whether that's quality, whether that's great customer service, whether it's selling a big product. It's not the thrill of the cash. And actually a lot of people go, I've got to that point now where I actually want to go and enjoy life. You sell out, you get a pot of cash, but actually what you've got up out of bed for every day, and you've never ever had a problem getting out of bed, because you love what you do, whether it's 3 a.m, 5 a.m, and you're still working at 1 o'clock the following morning, you get out of bed because you absolutely love the thrill. It's adrenaline. It's a bit like the adrenaline rush. If you talk about sports people and football managers, for example, I was involved in football for a while, and actually football managers don't actually come down from a game for about 4 or 5 hours after a game. That. Because it's the adrenaline rush that has to get out of their system. And I think entrepreneurial behaviours are very much like that. And what happens is you lose something. You've got to wad your money, but actually it means nothing, really. And that's not being arrogant. It's not being, people might say, well, you're lucky sod or whatever it may be. Yeah. But actually that's not what motivates you. It is about improving the. I had in my first business at Asa, we had 250 people, mainly employed in the northeast, and it was a responsibility to make sure that those people could pay their mortgages, send the kids to school, have good holidays, and enjoy their lives. Worked hard, but I took that responsibility very, very seriously. Yeah,
and that's great. That, and I think it's probably good advice for anyone out there right now who's planning on exiting businesses and planning on this big plan of growing over 3 years and selling out. And I'm a firm believer of, if you focus on the cash and generating cash from a business, you will generate the wrong type of cash, or you will never make cash. If you enjoy what you do, people always say the byproducts will come, the money will come. Because if you're enjoying what you do and you're putting all your heart and soul into it, you have a passion for it, then a byproduct of that you will generate the cash flow and the money. But if you focus on the money, you'll generate the wrong kind of money.
Totally agree.
The money will consume you and it won't be where you want it to be. So you've sold your business. You've got, you've started to slip into depression. Where did you go from there? How did you get out of that? What did you do?
I tried to commit suicide, basically.
Right. Okay.
About 3 days after we'd sold the business, I was at home. I'd got everything, but I'd got nothing, and I'd had a little bit of mental illness problems before that, but nothing that acute. And I just felt that it wasn't worth continuing. So I took an overdose, and I was carted off to hospital.
Yeah.
I have to say the A&E didn't give you much sympathy, and I can see why, because you don't deserve sympathy. But that was actually a sort of plea, a cry out to say, I need some help, actually. And there's a lot of, mental illness is a sexy thing at the moment. If it's probably sexy is not the right word, but it's a topical thing.
Is, yeah.
It's a trend. Everybody seems to be talking about it. But I think if you've got it, you've got it, and you live with it, and it's just inherently within you. And all you can do is learn to control it a little bit better. And I went to see a cognitive behavioural therapist, and after about 6 weeks, he said to me, "I don't need to see you anymore, Pete." I said, "I'm coming every week."
Yeah.
And I spent 2 years with a cognitive behavioural therapist, just learning how to control behaviours.
Yeah.
Because some of my behaviours weren't good. Learning how to control or seeing the depression coming.
Yeah.
And learning and understanding what mechanisms there are to actually enable you to control that depression or minimise the impact. Because the people who suffer as a consequence of depression is those people around you, your kids, your wife, your partner, your broader family. Often you hide it from your work colleagues. They don't see a lot of it. But you go home and, you kick the cat. Hopefully you don't kick the wife. But, you kick the cat and you learn to try and control it. But those people that have not had depression, we're all tipping over that glass between on the edge of it all the time. And it's the people who are good at controlling it are those that stop that glass from overflowing.
Yeah.
And it can be the smallest thing that just tips you over that edge. So I've just tried to learn to control it over the while. Don't get it right all the time, but certainly try.
And I think that's key, and I've openly spoke about my battles in the past, and when I've spoke about these things on podcasts, and I've had some of my friends going, "Yeah, I had no idea," and I think that's the key. If you always mask it well, and it never, once you've suffered or once you understand, it never really leaves you. You just learn to control it. You learn to keep it at bay. You learn to put things in place where you try and think more positively or put things into perspective, especially from the cognitive behaviour therapist that you'll have seen. It allows you to put things into boxes and things like you would generally have worried about, that, well, I don't need to worry about that. I'm worrying about something that's never happened. I'm worrying about something that's hasn't happened yet or will never happen, but that worry just keeps compounding. And I suppose the people who've suffered or suffering who don't know how to put it into that box will continue to suffer because they don't have the therapists or the people around them to support them to put them into that boxes to allow them to get on with normal life, really.
I think Dave, I think it's right. And I think a couple of little illustrations, people used to say, I used to sort of just flare up for no apparent reason whatsoever. And people go, "Why did you do that?" And you'd say, "I don't know."
Yeah.
And actually, the way I always tried to describe it now, is it's a bit like a beer glass, and stress levels go up during the day. But as you go to bed, your stress levels go back down.
Yeah.
But if you suffer from mental illness, they don't go back down to the level that they did. And over a period of time, your beer glass keeps getting fuller and fuller and fuller. And the thing that tips you over the edge and gets that beer glass to overflow can be something so small.
Yeah, it is.
And it's understanding that that's coming, and you're trying to make sure your beer glass never fills. And I think the second point, which is the point you just made, which I think is really good, one of the CBT guy used to say to me, he says, your life's like an apartment block, and on every floor there has to be space.
Yeah.
Space for Peter, space for Sarah, which is my wife, space for Tom and Samantha, which are my children, space for my grandchildren, space for my stepchildren.
Yeah.
And you have to find each of those floors needs to be allocated a bit of time and a bit of space. And I think we all get consumed in either our self-importance or our own lives. And I always try and think to myself, am I allocating enough time to each of those floors? And sometimes I don't get it right.
And that's probably an old Tony Robbins of what he's preached for, God knows how many years he's been here. He always says, he uses the table analogy where if you're only focusing on one thing in your life, whether that be work, business, cash flow, and that's your one leg of your table, if that one leg of your table was your business and your business goes, your whole life has fell around you. And probably when I suffered my whole life was focused around that one table leg, and that was my business. So when something happened within my business, my whole world was rocked. What I didn't do was have another table leg, which might have been one of my sons, another table leg that might be my other son, then my wife, then my fitness, then, you know, my health, my finances, everything. So you could have had a table with 8 legs. So if your business is one of them and your business goes and the table leg goes, you've got 6 other legs on this table. You can still use it. It's still sturdy. And I think that's a great analogy for people. And how many times do we hear each other probably say to ourselves, oh, we need to spend more time with each other. We need to go on more dates. We need to make more of an
Not
effort.
with you, Dave, no.
Not with me, no. But, you know, you say this to your wife or your partner, and you go, we need to do more. You'll go away for the weekend and you'll love it because you've spent that time with each other. But then 6 months till the next weekend away because you're consumed. And I think it's so important to try and do something at least once a month. Focus on something. Go on a date. Take your wife out. Go out with your kids. Take your kids out somewhere where spend equal amount of time with each of your children and find that common ground. Because, you know, my children are young, 10 and 7, but they'll get to a point where as they grow, they have different interests, and I've got to try and show an interest in them. So I think
I mean, one of the things, Dave, I do at the moment is I spend a lot of time mentoring MDs as part of a role where I'm chairman of their various businesses. And one business I'm involved with, it's a lady MD. She's married, she's got two teenage children. And part of the mentoring we do is I make sure that once a month she has a date night with her husband. That's part of the mentoring that we give. Great. And she has to go and do a date night. And she'll text me and say, we're off on date night tonight, Pete. And that's absolutely so fulfilling because it's absolutely important because she's so committed and passionate about her business that sometimes people, unless somebody stands back and says, there are other things in life as well. So if that business does fall away or something untoward happens, you need those support mechanisms around you. And it's so important. And
that's great, that. And I think your mentoring that you're doing with that person and your other businesses that you mentor with, to have that level, I bet you there's not many consultants going into that level right now or coaches or business coaches going in that level. And it's so important to have that. And I suppose that person will go on that date night, that Friday, that Saturday, enjoy the weekend. And if you've enjoyed the weekend, coming into work on a Monday, you're a lot more positive when you've had a good weekend.
Yeah.
When you know you've not just a good weekend. I think you're better on a Monday when your weekend you feel fulfilled.
Yeah.
And you think, right, okay, I'm ready to start the day.
And everybody's different, Dave. Same lady. She comes to my house every Monday morning, 7:00, and she has 2 hours. And she says that just sets her up for the week. It just clears her head, gets a perspective of what's important in the business that week, and that enables us to go into the office fresh and actually absolutely committed to what she wants to achieve. And it's really had a massive positive impact on her business over the last 18 months or so. So
that's excellent, that, and I think that's you know, great advice for anybody listening there. So you've been through therapy, you've got help. Then where does your career take from there?
Well, I lost me brains and joined a consortium and bought a football club. So that was the next that was the next challenge.
So I take it you've always been a lifelong fan of Derby.
Yes, absolutely. I've lost my passion for it now, I have to say. But so 2005, sold my business, bucket full of money. Think you're the top of the world in some respects, and think the football club was struggling, 56 million in debt, very unpopular owners, and I came together with 4 other people, local businessmen. They called us the League of Gentlemen, which none of us were gentlemen. And we came together and we bought Derby County in April 2006, and what a journey that was.
So you bought, and I think, what do people always say? If you're a billionaire and you want to lose lots of money, buy a football club. So if you're a millionaire, you want to lose lots of money, buy a football club. So you buy the football club, and that is probably me being a Sunderland fan, and I've been a lifelong Sunderland fan for me since. If I got the chance to buy Sunderland Football Club, I'd feel like that day of buying that football club would be up there with one of the greatest days, especially being a football fan. So how was that day one in Derby County?
Day one was fabulous, and you're absolutely right. It was one of the greatest days of my life. My father had a season ticket since 1947. When I was 5, I had a season ticket from age of 5. And I remember when I was 10, I said to my dad one day, I'm going to buy the football club for you. And that day in 2006 was just incredible to see Dad sitting in the director's box. They all thought it was his money and he'd bought it and I was just the son. But anyway, but that day, and to walk out on the pitch in front of 30-odd thousand people applauding you and congratulating you was an incredible day. It was a better day the day we sold it, by the way, but it's a bit like buying a boat. The best day in the world is the best day is buying it and the second best day is selling it. Yeah. So, no, it was an incredible day. It was, and the days are gone of local people buying their local football club, to be honest. It's sad, very sad in many ways, but the world moves on. But, it was an incredible day. Incredible day.
So your journey is of owning a football club. What's the key takeaways of owning a football club? What would you say the biggest challenge was?
Well, it's an industry that it's the only industry that I've ever been involved in where you cannot influence the core product. Yeah. Which is on that Saturday afternoon at 3:00, although there's not that many games played now on a Saturday at 3:00, when those 11 young men walk out over that white line onto the turf, you could have prepared all week doing the corporate side and doing the admin side of the club, and you might have a big new sponsor sitting alongside you ready to sign a deal, and then they go out and they just play bloody awful. And you get so frustrated with it, but there's nothing you can do about it. And it's moved on even since we owned it, in that, most players now from the Championship upwards, they're millionaires. Yeah. Well. And motivating millionaires at 20, 22, 24, 26 is a challenge. And
I can imagine that is a challenge, because these are not just, millionaires who've you talk about the overnight success, but generally business people have been 10, 15, 20 years to get where they are. These guys have come out of school, signed pro contracts, and some of them within a year of coming out of school are millionaires. There's nobody in the family who are millionaires. There's nobody in the family who've ever dealt with this level of money, this level of attention, this level of social media. I can imagine it is the biggest nightmare with a 17, 18-year-old millionaire walking in probably thinking he is everything. He's got everything. Yeah. And, take me after how you manage that. How do you even start to manage that?
And I think also people forget that, 99.9% of kids that start off at 10, 11 or 8, 7 wanting to be a professional footballer, 99.9% of them don't get there. Yeah. So we are looking at and dealing with a very elite bunch of individuals who have got to the top of their profession. And I don't decry any footballer actually getting it, because frankly, if somebody's prepared to pay the money, you can't decry or not take it. And I think the other thing that people often don't realise is football is a pretty ruthless game.
Yes, it is.
In that, I read a lot of autobiographies, and mainly sporting autobiographies. And football, a player could be settled at a club, settled at home with their family and the kids at school, and they'll come into training the next day, and the manager says, "I've sold you to a club 200 miles down the road." Actually, or I've sold you, or you're never playing for this club again unless you go. And therefore their whole life turns upside down, not because they want it to. Yeah. And people forget that. They see greedy footballers and all of those sorts of things. And therefore, it's not surprising that players, when they get an opportunity to move, to make good for their families and set their families up for the rest of their lives, actually they do that because actually the clubs are as selfish as the players. And they're also only 90 minutes away from from an injury that terminates their career. So it's a pretty ruthless industry. So I admire nearly all the players, not all of them, but nearly all of the players that have made it, because they really are at the elite of their profession.
So the biggest accolade, Derby, getting them promoted to the Premier League?
Yeah, within a year we went to the Premier League. New Wembley Stadium, first playoff game at New Wembley against West Brom. 1-0. Stephen Pearson scored. It was a pretty dour game, to be honest. That was a good moment as well.
Yeah, good moment. And then how do you prepare the club for the Premier League? What's the ethos when a club gets promoted from the Championship to the Premier League? And the ultimate goal is probably for every football club to play and sustain a life in the Premier League. How do you prepare a football club, prepare a county, if you like, and everybody, the fans around it, to say, we're going to the Premier League and we're going to have a go?
Well, it's difficult because if you go to the for example, the playoff game, it literally is flicking a coin and it's heads or tails. And therefore the morning after the game, you have the business plan that says we're in the Premier League, or you have the business plan that says we're still in the Championship. So actually, there's very little planning that you can actually do because you don't want to preempt what might not happen for a start. So it's really, really hard, and therefore that's why the clubs that come up by the playoffs generally struggle, because they're 3, 4, 5 weeks behind the clubs that get automatically promoted. And not only that, often the club that gets promoted through the playoff has come through quite quickly at the end. So therefore the preparations aren't that good. Clearly the supporters are hyped up and looking forward to it. But everything changes. Expectations change, dealing with the media changes, the finances of the club change dramatically almost overnight. Players' wages double, their bonuses to pay out, there are players to sign, there are bigger and better agents to deal with. All of those sorts of things mean that actually it's very, very difficult to plan.
And what is it like dealing with an agent? I think they get bad press.
Yeah, they do.
The agents, the fans, give the agents stick because they ultimately drive the, when your club's trying to sign a good player and they're sticking over wages, or they can easily, you've heard stories of the travelling down the A1 and then all of a sudden the V are right, they're going to Manchester, they're not going to London anymore because there's a better deal come along. So what is it like dealing with the agents? Can you form a bond with an agent?
I think that in any world there are good agents and bad agents. I didn't personally get involved too heavily with them, to be perfectly honest. So there's probably other people who've got a better view of that. They're looking after the interests of the players and themselves at the same time. But fundamentally, they've got the players' interests at heart, and the club has got its interests at heart. And you just have to battle through and go through those processes. But with anything, you have to build a relationship. And if you get a good relationship with an agent, that can produce good dividends for the club. Because the agent has big influence as to where a player goes to. And, good players have choice. So I wasn't heavily involved in that side of the business, to be honest. But, an interesting bunch of individuals, let's say.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, your time at the football club, when did all that come to an end? What was the exit plan with the football club? Well,
there's no exit plan. The League of Gentlemen all fell out. All of us fell out. Nobody was particularly right. We were all all good, successful people, and we were all trying to have our own way. And we were approached by an American consortium, General Sports Entertainment out of Detroit, and then we were in the Prem, and we decided it was right to sell the club at that point, and we did quite successfully in that sense. And then the club went on from there. You know, as people will know, probably the worst points history in the Premier League. Only 11 points.
Well, to be honest, I was over the moon when you got the worst points history in the Premier League, because we were the worst points holder of the Premier League, of 15 points I think it was. So when Derby managed to beat that, it took the onus off Sunderland.
I didn't know that, Dave, but I do know that of our 11 points, 4 of them were against Newcastle.
Oh, well, there you go.
So,
I mean,
does that make it even better?
It's even better when you hear things like that. So, yeah, I do remember that you held the
and still do, yeah.
And still do. And I think, to be honest, I think it could be even teams that get promoted now in the Premier League. They all seem to have a little bit of a go, don't they? They're all living with no fear when they get promoted from the Premier League now. So I think that will take some beating, the 11 points.
Yeah, it's an award that is something I'm not proud of, but at least we got there.
Yeah, you got there. At least you can laugh about it, can't you?
Yeah, that's right.
So at the end of you sold from the football club, and then what were your plans from there? What was the?
I then set up another business alongside that, business called 3As, which was another apprenticeship training business that we'd set up from scratch. And we set that up in 2008 with a colleague, and we grew that business again, going back into what I loved really, which was apprenticeships.
Yeah.
And we built, or so we thought, a very, very successful business very quickly.
And you were a grade 1 Ofsted provider. This is where I got to know of yourself really, with my background in education. And you were the only grade 1 provider.
Or one of very few.
few.
So we were. For the first 3 or 4 years, we were doing something called Train to Gain, which wasn't apprenticeships. Yes. It was a government initiative about adult training, and we were heavily involved in the logistics sector. We became the biggest logistics provider of training at that point, delivering about 3,000 or 4,000 a year MVQs in the workplace. And then in 2012, we saw the change of government focus. Coalition government with big, strong Tory control of that, and they weren't as focused on Train to Gain, much more focused on apprenticeships, and we decided to move the business into that direction. So in 2012, we had about 150 people at that point, and we took the decision that we had to migrate the business away from that adult training into apprenticeships. So we spent about a year migrating the business in that direction. And then for almost certainly really building a new business, really. Right, okay. Because the business was a different business.
So you just reinvented yourself.
Reinvented, correct. And then you're right, we got our first Ofsted in 2014, which was grade 1s across the board. We had grade 1s with Asa, actually, as well.
And there wasn't many providers, like private providers. Yeah, there might have been some colleges, but there wasn't many. You were in a pretty elite club.
Yeah, less than 2%. Less than 2% of all providers were grade 1. So that was 2014. We were delivering apprenticeships mainly for young people, 16 to 18-year-olds, in what we call professional services, so IT and accountancy.
And at what level are we talking? So what level?
Level 3 and 4. So A-levels and foundation degree level. We didn't look at level 2, which is the equivalent of the GCSEs.
And you became so big, the government gave you your own contract, am I right?
That's right. In 2000 and beginning of 2012, October 2012, we got our first contract, which was 300,000.
Yeah.
And then by 2016, we'd taken that to just over 30 million.
30 million.
Yeah.
So in what's that?
Less than 4 years.
Less than 4 years. And what was it like? So what was the? I mean, that is rapid growth, isn't it, for any business, from 300,000 to 30 million in less than 4 years? How did you keep a hold of that? How did you sustain that level of growth? Yeah,
well, the way we ran the business or built the business is we created 38 centres. So they were like mini franchises, but they weren't. We owned them all.
Yeah.
And therefore, each of those mini centres, so we had one in Middlesbrough, for example, we had one in Newcastle, we had one in York.
Yeah.
Each of those had their own staffing. The staffing model was the same. And therefore, whilst we would have had, 4,000 or 5,000 apprentices across the business, each centre only had about 80 to 100 apprentices. Mm-hmm. So we were able to manage them as if they were like mini Pizza Expresses.
Yeah, like mini training businesses.
Correct.
Within the bigger.
Correct.
Within the bigger arch.
So everybody knew each apprentice that was coming into their academy, where they were on their cycle, where they were with their own personal development at 16 to 18, because these young people are developing rapidly during that period of time. So we were able to keep a handle on what was going on with the business at a time of rapid growth through actually making it a smaller model. And then we have obviously regionalised the model. So we put a number of academies into clusters. So there was a northeastern cluster.
Yes.
And then there would be a Yorkshire and Humber cluster and a Midlands cluster. And that's how we built it.
And probably the key focus, and still a massive focus, because in the northeast we've got an ever-growing tech sector. I go to some of the Friday meetings at Tuss Park in Newcastle, where there's a lot of tech companies around, and a couple of people who've been involved with have tech recruitment businesses, and the biggest problem, it's the biggest growing sector, but people can't recruit the staff for it. And what they're seeing is people going in at university level, by the time they get to the end of their degree, the degree that they were on is actually out of date of some of the tech that they've been taught and the practice that they've been taught. So I can imagine that was just a nightmare within itself.
It was very exciting, because a lot of these young kids, 16 to 18, bright young kids, they're keen, and actually particularly going into, say, for example, a digital media studio or something like that, some of these youngsters knew more than some of the business owners, because they were more up to date. So they brought real value to those businesses very, very quickly. And there's still huge opportunity, not just in Newcastle, but in Teesside. A lot of tech developments around the new mayor around Teesside and the work that he's doing. I was only listening to Question Time the other week about the work he's doing around the airport and things like that. Yeah,
because that's an ever-growing airport where, I've only ever travelled out of Durham Tees Valley Airport once in my life. Everything is so focused on Newcastle, where I think they're trying to focus a bigger impact on Durham Tees Valley and that area. So that you've grew that to 30 million, and then where does it go from there? What's the...
Well, 500 people, 500 full-time people. We had a salary bill of sort of 2.5 million a month. So it was a big business to run. Yeah. And we got notified of another Ofsted in 2018. We went through that Ofsted in May 2018, got grade ones all over again. And but that report never got produced because, cut a long story short, apparently there was a whistleblower. The whistleblower was handed there to the press. The press then looked at it with the DFE and the ESFA, and they did an investigation and ultimately terminated the contract in October of 2018. So the business then effectively ended that day. I was on a beach in the West Indies, not because I'd, so that was the first I knew about it. And the mystery continues, let's just say.
Yeah, and this is a big bone of contention I have with certainly the FE sector. So you commit a crime in this country, you go on trial, you're tried in front of a jury judge, the decisions are made, and then you're guilty or not guilty. You do something in the further education sector and you're instantly guilty, trying to prove yourself innocent from there. And you're right in terms of stopping payments, and you've had a £30 million business end overnight over somebody saying something, and you can't continue. 500 people lose their job over somebody producing something or saying something or doing something. That does not happen in any other sector of business.
No, totally agree with you, Dave. Absolutely, totally agree with you. And to this day, I, as the managing director and major shareholder of that business, to this day, I still have no idea for the reason it was closed down. I have no report from the ESFA or the DFE. There were apparently 2 investigations being undertaken, and which were reported in the press. But the problem with the press, you have no right of reply.
Yeah.
And I have a freedom of information response from the DFE of only 2 weeks ago, where the DFE said there was no investigation that ever took place. So it is a mystery as to what happened, and the sad thing isn't a sad thing for Peter Marples, but it is for the 500 people and the 4,500 to 5,000 apprentices that were displaced.
Because again, thinking about this logically, and thinking about, I'm going to compare this to the Thomas Cook scenario. There was all of these people on holiday when Thomas Cook went into administration who couldn't be brought home, and it cost the country tens of millions,
hundreds of millions,
to get these people home. But the bailout of Thomas Cook wouldn't have cost as much. So logically, you must think, well, actually, we could not bail them out, because I don't believe in bailouts, and I think there's got to be some structure, and there's got to be something where the government took control of the business, and then eventually could have been sold off to a Hayes and a John Hayes who kindly stepped in and gave so many people work after that. Surely somebody at the government thought, hang on a minute, we're going to stop this guy's cash flow. He's got a £2.5 million a month wage bill, 500 staff, 5,000 learners, and still to this day, some of them learners have not found new providers because people at the top just didn't think logically. Am I right in saying that? Am I wrong? I don't know.
You're absolutely right. And actually, the situation's even worse, because those 500 staff were made redundant. Those 500 staff claimed redundancy from the government.
Yes, I'm aware of
and
that process.
2 or 3 days after, they would have got new jobs with new providers. And actually, there is a different way of doing it. And whether they were right or wrong to make the decision that they did, the people who were impacted, which was, not the owners, let's be right about it. The 500 staff and the 4,500 to 5,000 learners. There's a different way of doing it, Dave, I think, which actually reduces the impact on those individuals and ultimately reduces the cost of that. Yeah. And the reputation of the sector as well.
Absolutely. And where do you think, we'll not dwell on it, these things too much, and it's probably another painful point of your life, really, where you've maybe, again, moving forward, got everything going, and then overnight it's decimated again. So how do you pick yourself back up after that? Where do you go from there? Well,
I think if we come back to the very, very, very sad situation with Caroline Flack. I wasn't a Caroline Flack, and I certainly wasn't in the media spotlight in the same way that she was. But we had TV cameras on our drive. We had death threats in the post as a husband and wife, and our families. And actually, it's only because we were a positive people and we were together and strong together that we're actually able to come through it. Luckily, we had, some finances behind us in that sense. So, but there are people in this sector, there are people, ex-college principals who've gone through similar things, that have committed suicide. Because they actually see no future. They see their earning capacity drying up. And it was just simply that we were strong together that enabled us to come through it. But it was very difficult, and there was a lot of rubbish written. It was referred to the police, but the police never did any investigation. The police never interviewed anybody. But that is still sitting on Google.
Yeah, of course it is.
If you do a search on, it's still damning.
Of course it is. It's still damning,
and you have to be strong. You have to be strong, and the press often don't think of the personalities that sit behind when they write what they write. And my only plea, I suppose, in all of this is that actually they just need to be a little bit more responsible.
Well, let's be honest. The press write headlines. The press want to sell newspapers, sell stories, get YouTube, clickbait, people to, click through when they see. And that is all the press do. And if anything, out of, the lady you mentioned, Caroline, and what happened there, if anything that came out, it was more damning towards the press. It was more damning that, unfortunately, we live in a society where people like to see people fail. People like to see the downfall. And I just listened to something this morning when I was on the bike, riding the bike, that somebody compared what happened to Caroline with what happened to Ant of Ant and Dec. When that happened to Ant and Dec, Ant had an arm around his shoulder and was given support. Caroline they were saying something about ITV, and where Caroline was ousted and seemed to be a person who lost her job and for making a mistake. And there's too many people, if you make a mistake, if you do something wrong, that it's almost an open forum to say what you want, write what you want, comment what you want. And we live in a society now where it's easy for someone to go on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, write what they want, get in and get out, and have no consequence to that. And I think that is wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
I think whether you've made a mistake, whether you've done something, you need to wait till the facts come out in terms of investigations. And even when the facts come out, we're in a country where there's a rehabilitation program for prisoners. So why can't there be rehabilitation for anybody who's done something? And I think you're right. And advice would be to, if you think it's the end of the road, if you've done something wrong, if you're getting hounded by the press, there's always a brighter day coming. And you're right in what you say. You're positive people. You stuck together. You got through it, and you probably look back at that time now as a learning curve, as another part of your story, really, and another part of your...
Dave, we've learned so much as a couple. I mean, there's as a family as well. Actually, we had a big business. Again, we were on that buzz of driving it. We created a real good brand in our sector. We were a national. We'd opened in the United States. It was very exciting. But actually, the consequence of that is we had little time for each other. We didn't have holidays. Or when we did have holidays, I was on the phone for 10 hours a day.
Yeah,
and actually, what has happened, my wife and I were only talking the other night. The last 18 months, bizarrely, have probably been the best 18 months that we've had together. Fantastic. Because we've actually found that life isn't about, drive. It's about actually working smarter. And it's about, the world is a big place. We've seen some beautiful parts of the world, not spent a fortune over the last 18 months. And it's a wonderful place. There are wonderful parts of the UK I've never seen. Yep. There are wonderful parts of Europe that I've never seen until the last 18 months or so. And I think what it has done for us, it has put it all into perspective. That, again, another bucket of cash would not have made us any happier, actually. And in a way, it's been a good thing, out of adversity. There are some good things that come out of it. And I think somebody said to me back in the 90s, a guy called Chris Webb, who was chief exec of a college in Birmingham. And he said to me, and he was going through really difficult times. And he said to me, Pete, all you can do is you just put one foot in front of the other, one at a time. He said, and the next day will become a better day. And I always held that. And I think he's true. We haven't lost anybody. My wife has lost her mother. I've lost both my parents in the last 18 months. Actually, those things are probably more important than actually the business, even though, I wake up some mornings and think, if only I'd still got the business. But it's not the be and all and end all.
And I follow a guy called Ed Milet, and one of his major sayings is, everything happens for us and not to us. And I think if you can apply that to when something's not going right, if you can apply, why has this happened to me? What is it for? What can I take from this and move on? Then, as you say, in one step at a time, then, that's excellent. That. So what is since then, and what does the future look like for Peter?
Well, very positive. 2 grandchildren,
excellent.
Which is excellent. I spend my time now chairing a few boards in a different number of sectors. So an IT business, an engineering business, which is very exciting. New sectors for me. So I can sell garage doors now and know all about that, and know all about cybersecurity and software development and things like that. So that's really exciting, and I'm really enjoying that because most of my time is mentoring the chief execs, and that's something I really, really enjoy. My wife has set up a couple of businesses which I'm supporting her with. One's around careers advice for young people, which I think is pretty awful in the UK, and we're pretty determined to try and do something to make that better. And then most recently, my wife had this idea of creating a company called Promote Ed, which is actually a positive news forum for the further education and skills sector, where it's a pretty hostile environment, the market we're in, dominated by certain trade press. And it was her idea to say, well, there's actually something better here. We can do something more positively. And so she created that, and I'm helping her with that. It's been going only about 4 weeks, but we've got 700 registered users, 6,000 or 7,000 page views in the first month, and some really good things coming out of that. And a lot of providers who've been in similar positions to us, picking the phone up, going, how do I get out of this, or how can I get things better? And she's really driving that hard. But I'm enjoying her seeing that great. Working as well. So that's what we're doing.
I suppose you were a bit of a lifeline for providers who've had similar stories, and people who are hanging in the background, afraid to step back out into the limelight or step back out into the sector. And I suppose you're probably a guiding light for people. And you're right, good news stories. Why do all we have to read is doom and gloom? Why don't we want to share good stories and the good things that are going on in education and apprenticeships and the levy and the good things that are out there helping young people and businesses? So,
there's a lot. There's more than you think going on out there. Just some of them don't hit the press. Only obviously the big high-profile ones hit the press, but certainly in the last 4 weeks, my wife's phone and my phone haven't stopped ringing from people going, I've been through the similar position, college principals who've been turfed out, providers who have gone through really difficult issues with the Funding Council or other organisations. And we're there just to help. We don't charge anything. It's a sort of self-help group, really, with a group of forums on it. We're going to develop training courses and conferences and things of that nature. So the idea of it's not for profit, but it's very much to try and put a positive aim around what the sector is doing. Brilliant. And really promote the fantastic things that both colleges are doing and the private training provider network and the employers and indeed the third sector, because there's a lot of good stuff going on in the third sector as well. And I'm fed up of listening to sleaze and scandal, really, often which most of it isn't true.
Oh, brilliant. So there's the Promote Ed, there's the direct. Is anything else going on? Anything else?
No, that's about it. Lots of holidays. So enjoying life. So my wife's found the Peloton bike, so that's really good, and we've got 2 little doggies, so we spend a lot of time doing that. But I'm sure other things will come along, other opportunities will come along over the next few months or so. So watch this space.
Well, you seem to be out there, you seem to be active, which is great, and I think you're right. If you're out there, you're putting yourself out there, opportunities will always come on.
Absolutely right.
If anybody wanted to get in touch regarding Promote Ed, or anyone to get in touch regarding the mentoring, where would they find you? Where would they? Promote
Ed is www.promote-ed.co.uk. If people want to get in touch with me personally, it's Peter at Marples FT. That's F for Freddie, T for Tommy, .co.uk.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Peter. It's been a pleasure, and it's been a great interview, and I've loved hearing about your journey, your story, and I wish you luck for the future. Yeah,
thanks, Dave, and good luck to Sunderland at the last part of the season. Although I've got a little affinity with Rotherham, so don't finish above the Rotherham.
We'll try not
Thank
to.
You.
Thank you. Cheers.
Take care. Bye.